The first sign that something was terribly wrong wasn't the explosion. It was the smell. One moment Jack Russo was nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee in the observation deck of Starlight Beacon, staring out at the endless velvet black of space. The next, the air filled with a scent of burnt sugar and old meat. It was a smell from his childhood, from the county fair the year the Ferris wheel broke down. A smell he hadn't thought about in 30 years. Then the station screamed. Not an alarm, not a klaxon, but a sound like a billion people, crying out at once, a wave of pure misery that vibrated in Jack's bones and made the coffee cup jump from his hand and shatter on the grated floor. The lights flickered, died, then came back on, bathed in a sick red emergency glow. He was already moving, his engineer's instincts taking over. His boots clanged on the metal deck as he ran toward the engine room, the source of all the station's power and, he suspected, all its problems. The Holloway Drive, humanity's first attempt at true faster-than-light travel. A project so secret and so unstable that they built this entire station on the edge of nowhere, just to test it. They'd called it a warp core in the press releases, a fancy name for a bomb that was supposed to punch a hole in reality. He slammed his hand on the panel for the engine room door. It hissed open to chaos. Dr. Aris Thorne, the drive's creator, was on the floor, his glasses askew, blood trickling from his nose. 2 junior techs were clutching their heads, moaning. And in the center of the room, the Holloway Drive pulsed. It was a sphere of containment fields and humming conduits. But now, a fracture had appeared in its core. Not a crack in the metal, but a crack in the world itself. It was a shimmering, vertical slit of non-space, the color of a bruise, and it was maybe 10 feet tall. "Shut it down!" Jack yelled, his voice raw. Thorne, pushing himself up, just stared at the rift with a look of mad discovery.
Incredible. The energy readings are off the charts. It's not a wormhole. It's something else.
That's when the voice came over the comms. It wasn't Station Commander Rostova or anyone from the crew. It was a little girl's voice, tinny and distant, yet clear as a bell. A voice that stopped Jack's heart cold. "Daddy?" the voice whispered, a sound filled with static and fear. "Daddy, I'm scared. It's so dark in here." It was the voice of his daughter, Lily. Lily, who had died in a car crash 7 years ago. The 2 techs stopped moaning and stared at the comms panel with wide, terrified eyes. The voice wasn't just in Jack's head. It was real. Thorne's jaw hung open. From the crack in reality, the smell of burnt sugar grew stronger, mixing with something else now. Something like ozone and damp soil, like a freshly dug grave. The station shuddered again, a deep, groaning tremor that felt less like a machine and more like a dying animal. The slit in the world pulsed, a dark heartbeat in the center of the engine room. And Lily's voice, a ghost in the machine, whispered again. "Why did you let me go, Daddy?" Commander Eva Rostova was a woman who lived by the book. Regulations were her religion, and protocol was her prayer. But there was no protocol for a hole in reality that smelled like a morgue and broadcast the voices of dead children. She stood on the bridge, her knuckles white where she gripped the command chair. Her face, usually a mask of stern authority, was pale and tight. "Report," she snapped, her voice betraying a slight tremor. Maria, the comms officer, a young woman barely out of her 20s, looked up from her console, her eyes haunted. "Commander, the signal is impossible. It's not on any known frequency. It's not even a radio wave. It's just there, and it's not just the one voice. I'm picking up fragments. Hundreds of them, Thousands. She swallowed hard. I heard my grandmother. She was humming a lullaby she used to sing to me. Rostova's gaze drifted to the main view screen. It showed a live feed from the engine room. The bruise-colored tier hung in the air, silent and menacing. Jack Russo was there, standing frozen, while Dr. Thorne crawled closer to the anomaly, a datapad in his trembling hand. "Russo, what's your status?" Rostova's voice boomed over the engine room speakers. Jack flinched as if waking from a nightmare. He looked up at the camera, his face a mess of grief and disbelief. "The drive is stable, but the event is not. Whatever this is, it's holding itself open. I can't get close. The energy field is wrong." "Wrong how?" "It feels cold," Jack said, his voice dropping low. "Not a normal cold. It feels like all the heat is being sucked out of you. And the sound, you can feel it more than hear it. It's a feeling of hopelessness." "Nonsense," Thorne's voice crackled through. He was practically on his knees before the rift, his face lit by its ugly light. "This is a monumental discovery. This isn't a shortcut to another star system. It's a doorway to a parallel dimension, a plane of existence we never dreamed of." "A plane of existence that broadcasts at people?" Rostova shot back. "That's not a discovery, Doctor. That's a nightmare." She ordered a diagnostic probe, a small disc-shaped drone, to be sent into the rift. Riggs, the station's burly security chief, personally carried the drone to the engine room. He was a man who didn't scare easily, a veteran of asteroid belt skirmishes, but he gave the shimmering tear a wide berth, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm, as if he expected a monster to leap out. Jack guided the probe by remote, his hands surprisingly steady. The small drone hovered for a moment, then zipped forward, disappearing into the dark slit. For a second, nothing happened. The data stream on Maria's console was a flat line. Then it came alive. The video feed was a chaotic storm of static and color. Jagged shapes flashed for milliseconds, twisted landscapes of what looked like black rock under a blood-red sky. But it was the other sensor readings that made Maria gasp. "Commander, atmospheric composition is, I don't know what it is. It's not nitrogen or oxygen. The sensors are labeling it unidentified biological and particulate matter. Temperature is absolute zero in some spots and thousands of degrees in others, simultaneously. And the audio pickup." She trailed off, her face turning green. She tapped a button, and a sound filled the bridge. It was a cacophony, wind howling through canyons of bone. A low, wet, rhythmic squelching, like a giant, rotten heart beating. And layered over it all, whispers. Millions of them, all talking at once. A torrent of regret, pain, and sorrow. Then through the noise, one clear, distinct sound. A metallic screech. The probe's video feed flickered wildly, showing a brief, impossible image. It was a shape. Long, spindly limbs. Too many joints, moving in a jerky, unnatural way. It was there for less than a second before the feed cut out completely. The data stream flatlined. "Probe is gone," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "It's just gone." On the bridge, a heavy silence fell, broken only by the low hum of the station's life support. The nightmare was no longer just a sound or a smell. It had a shape, and it knew they were watching. The dread settled over Starlight Beacon like a fine layer of dust. It got into the food, which suddenly tasted bland and metallic. It seeped into conversations, which became hushed and paranoid. Crew members started seeing things. A shadow darting down a corridor. a face in the reflection of a dark monitor. The station, once a symbol of humanity's bright future, now felt like a haunted house adrift in an infinite graveyard. Riggs, the security chief, was the first to really crack. He was found in a supply closet, huddled in the corner, his formidable frame shaking. He claimed he'd seen his old squad leader from the Titan Moon's conflict, a man named Corporal Davis, who had died in his arms. He was just standing there by the mess hall door. Riggs stammered to Rostova, his eyes wide with a terror Jack had never seen in him. He didn't have his helmet on. He didn't have his face. It was just a hole, and he asked me why I left him behind. Commander Rostova ordered a station-wide psych evaluation. A useless, by-the-book gesture that did nothing to calm the rising tide of fear. The problem wasn't in their heads. It was in the engine room. The rift was still there, a patient vertical wound in the fabric of their world. Dr. Thorne had set up a perimeter of sensors around it, treating it like a lab specimen. He was the only one who wasn't afraid. He was ecstatic. "Don't you see?" He'd argued with Rostova on the bridge. "It's reacting to us. It's reading our minds, our memories. It's a telepathic dimension. The scientific implications are staggering." "The security implications are what concern me, Doctor," Rostova had said, her voice like ice. "Right now, your telepathic dimension is slowly driving my crew insane." For Jack, the haunting was more personal, more cool. It wasn't just Lily's voice anymore. It was her presence. He would catch the scent of the cheap strawberry shampoo she used to use. He'd hear the faint sound of her giggling just on the edge of hearing. Once, turning a corner, he saw a flash of red, the color of her favorite little jacket, disappear around the next bend. Each time it was like a knife twisting in the old wound of his grief. He knew it wasn't real. He knew it was a trick, a cruel echo broadcast from that thing in the engine room. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. The breaking point came late during third shift. Jack was in his small quarters, trying and failing to sleep, when a new alarm blared through the station. Not the red alert of the initial incident, but a proximity alarm from the external sensors. He scrambled to the bridge. Maria was at her post, her face ashen. "Commander, something is coming out of it." All eyes snapped to the engine room. Feed on the main screen. The air around the dark slit was shimmering more intensely. Something was pushing its way through. It wasn't fast or violent. It was slow, deliberate, like a swimmer emerging from dark water. First, a long, pale appendage, thin as a bone, and unnaturally smooth, slid into view. Then another. Then a shape began to resolve itself from the shimmering distortion. It wasn't the spindly creature from the probe's video. It was worse. It was a person. Or what had once been a person. It was wearing the tattered remains of a Starlight Beacon Junior Tech's uniform. Its skin was gray and slick, its limbs bent at odd bird-like angles. It moved with a twitching, puppet-like motion, its head lolling on its neck. It was one of the techs from the engine room, the one who had disappeared during the first moments of the incident, the one they'd all assumed had been vaporized. The thing, the former man, took a shambling step forward. Its head snapped up and it looked directly at the camera. Its eyes were gone. In their place were two dark, empty sockets that seemed to drink the light. Its jaw opened, wider than any human jaw should, and a sound came out. Not a scream or a moan, but a perfect, crystal-clear imitation of Maria's grandmother, humming her lullaby. On the bridge, Maria let out a choked sob and collapsed at her console. The thing in the engine room took another lurching step, its empty eyes sweeping the room as if it were looking for something or someone. The shortcut to hell was no longer just sending whispers. It was sending messengers. Panic is a virus. On the confined decks of Starlight Beacon, it spread faster than any plague. The sight of the reanimated technician, a grotesque puppet twitching on the main view screen, shattered the last vestiges of discipline. People stopped going to their posts. They barricaded themselves in their quarters or huddled in small terrified groups in the mess hall, whispering about ghosts and demons. The station's orderly routine dissolved into a state of quiet, simmering terror. Commander Rostova tried to impose control. She ordered the thing in the engine room to be neutralized. Riggs, pulling himself together with a visible effort, took a security team armed with high-energy plasma rifles. They stood at the sealed engine room door, their faces grim. Through the reinforced window, they could see the puppet man shambling aimlessly around the Holloway Drive, its head lolling, the eerie lullaby still humming from its gaping mouth. "On my mark," Riggs said, his voice tight. The door hissed open. They fired. Beams of blue-white energy slammed into the creature. It convulsed, its gray skin smoking and charring, but it didn't fall. It didn't even seem to notice the pain. It just turned its head, its empty sockets fixing on the security team. The humming stopped. It opened its mouth and spoke in the voice of Riggs's dead squad leader. "You're too late, Riggs. You're always too late." Riggs froze, his rifle wavering. The thing lunged. Not with speed, but with a horrible, relentless shuffle. The security team fell back, firing wildly. One of them screamed and dropped his weapon, clutching his ears. "Make them stop," he shrieked. "Make the voices stop." They managed to slam the door shut and seal it. But the damage was done. The creature was immune to their weapons, and it could talk with the voices of their dead. The engine room was now a lost territory, a consecrated chamber for their new god of misery. Jack found Dr. Thorne in his lab, ignoring the chaos. The scientist was hunched over a console, his eyes bright with a feverish light. The screen was filled with data streams from the sensors he'd placed around the rift. "They're afraid of it, Jack," Thorne said without looking up. "They want to destroy it. They're like cavemen seeing fire for the first time and running away. This isn't an invasion. It's a communication." "That thing in there isn't communicating, Aris," Jack said, his voice hard. "It's a weapon, and it's using our own minds against us. It's feeding on our guilt, our fear. My daughter, Riggs' squad leader. Maria's grandmother. It's a parasite that latches onto grief. Or it's showing us what we need to see to understand." Thorne slammed his fist on the console. "This could be the key to everything. Life after death, the nature of consciousness. We can't just throw it away because it's scary." The station's systems began to fail in insidious ways. It wasn't just flickering lights anymore. The nutrient paste dispensers in the mess hall started extruding a foul-smelling black sludge. The internal comms would randomly broadcast bursts of agonized screaming. The air recyclers would occasionally pump in the scent of rot and old blood. It was as if the station itself was getting sick, infected by the presence of the rift. Jack felt it too. The ghost of Lily was no longer a fleeting sensation. She was becoming more solid. He saw her standing at the end of his bunk, her little red jacket bright against the gray metal, her face obscured by shadow. He knew, with a cold certainty in his gut, that it wasn't her. It was a lure, a hook baited with his deepest love and his most profound loss. He would lie in his bunk, rigid with fear and sorrow, listening to the phantom sound of her humming the same lullaby that came from the monster in the engine room. The paranoia solidified into factions. There was Rostova's group, a dwindling number of loyal crew, who wanted to follow procedure and wait for instructions for a fleet that would take months, if not years, to arrive. There was Thorne's faction, a handful of science techs who believed they were on the verge of a historic breakthrough. And then there were the rest, the majority, who were simply lost to fear, convinced the station was damned. Starlight Beacon was no longer a unified command. It was a floating madhouse, and the inmates were tearing it apart from the inside. The first to be truly lost was Maria. The young comms officer had grown more and more withdrawn since hearing her grandmother's voice. She'd stopped eating. She sat at her console on the bridge, staring at the static-filled displays, her headphones permanently clamped over her ears. She told people she was trying to filter out the whispers, but Jack saw the truth in her eyes. She was listening. She was searching for that one familiar voice in the storm of psychic noise. Jack found her one shift standing before the sealed door to the engine room. Her hand was pressed against the cold metal. "I can hear her, Jack," she said, her voice a dreamy, distant whisper. "She's calling for me. She says she's lonely. She wants me to sing with her." "Maria, that's not your grandmother," Jack pleaded, gently trying to pull her away. Her arm was cold to the touch. "It's a trap. It's the rift." She looked at him, her eyes unfocused. "But it sounds just like her. She says it doesn't hurt. She says it doesn't hurt. She says it's peaceful." On the other side, no more fear, no more sadness, just quiet. He managed to lead her back to the med bay where Rostova had her sedated. But the influence of the rift was too strong. Later that night, she slipped away. The station's internal sensors showed her walking with a strange, gliding motion, straight back to the engine room. No one could explain how she opened the sealed high-security door. The logs showed no override code was used. It was as if the station itself had let her in. The last image they had of her was from the engine room camera. She walked calmly past the twitching, grotesque form of the reanimated tech, who ignored her completely. She walked right up to the shimmering, bruise-colored slit in reality. She looked back at the camera, and for a moment, a small, sad smile touched her lips. Then she stepped through. She vanished into the rift without a sound, like a stone dropped into a black lake. The rift pulsed once, a soft, satisfied beat, and then was still. Maria was gone. Her disappearance broke something in the remaining crew. She wasn't a disfigured monster or a voice on the comms. She was one of them. She was a friend, and she had walked willingly into hell. The hope that they could simply contain the problem, that they could wait it out, died with her. They weren't living with a strange anomaly anymore. They were being fed to it, one by one. The station's decay accelerated. The infection was spreading. Corridors that were once straight now seemed to curve subtly, leading you in circles. Doors sometimes opened into blank walls, or, for a terrifying instant, onto a windswept plain of black sand under a red sky. Jack once opened a maintenance panel to check a power conduit, and found it filled with what looked like writhing organic tissue, pulsing with a faint, dark light. He slammed it shut, his heart hammering in his chest. The station's geometry was becoming unstable. Their reality was fraying at the edges, and the reality of the rift was bleeding through. The whispers grew louder, no longer confined to the comms. You could hear them in the hum of the air recyclers, in the sound of your own footsteps. They promised release. They promised an end to pain. They promised reunions with lost loved ones. It was a constant, seductive siren song of despair. Jack realized they were in a predator's digestive system. The station was the stomach, and the crew was being slowly dissolved, their minds and souls broken down and absorbed by the thing they had created. Maria hadn't been taken. She had been consumed, and the entity was still hungry. It was turning its attention, its full and undivided attention, to the one person on the station with the deepest, most exploitable wound. It was coming for Jack. The entity came for Jack not with a monster, but with a memory. He was in the cramped workshop, trying to jury-rig a bypass for the failing life support system when the world dissolved. The scent of ozone and metal was replaced by the smell of freshly cut grass and summer rain. The grey walls of the station melted away, replaced by the familiar yellow wallpaper of a child's bedroom. Sunlight streamed through a window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. And there she was, Lily. She was sitting on the floor, playing with her worn-out teddy bear Barnaby. She was exactly as he remembered her on the day of the accident. 7 years old, with a missing front tooth and a smear of chocolate on her cheek. She was wearing her little red jacket. She looked up at him, her brown eyes wide and full of life. Not empty sockets. Not a shadowed face, it was her. "Hi, Daddy," she said, her voice perfect, with none of the static or distance from the comms. Jack's breath caught in his throat. His tools clattered to the floor. He knew this was a lie. A deep, rational part of his brain screamed that this was the rift. This was the entity, using his memories to build a perfect cage for his mind. But seeing her so real, so solid. The grief was a physical force, a wave that buckled his knees. "Lily?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "I missed you," she said, her small face serious. "It was so cold after the car. But it's not cold here. It's warm. Everyone is waiting for you, Daddy." "Everyone?" Jack took a shaky step forward. The worn rug felt real under his boots. "Mom is here," Lily said, gesturing to the empty space beside her. "Grandpa, too. They said you've been sad for a long time. They said it's time to come home. You don't have to be sad anymore." This was the devil's bargain laid out before him. An end to the pain. A reunion with everyone he had ever lost. All he had to do was let go. All he had to do was believe. He could smell his wife's perfume, a faint hint of lavender. He could almost hear his father's gruff, loving laugh. The temptation was immense, a physical pull, stronger than gravity. It would be so easy. Just close his eyes and step into the fantasy. He looked at Lily's face, at the perfect, innocent smile, and he saw the lie. Lily, his real Lily, had a tiny scar above her left eyebrow from falling out of a tree. This Lily didn't. It was a small detail, an insignificant flaw in an otherwise perfect illusion. But it was enough. It was the crack in the beautiful prison wall. "You're not her," Jack said, the words tasting like acid in his mouth. Lily's smile faltered just for a second. "What are you talking about, Daddy? It's me." "No," Jack said, forcing strength into his voice. He was crying now, hot tears streaming down his face for the daughter he had lost all over again. Lily had a scar. You don't have her scar. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "You are not my daughter." The room flickered, the sunlight dimmed. Lily's face began to change. The warmth drained away, her skin turning waxy and pale. Her eyes, her beautiful brown eyes, began to darken, the color bleeding away until they were just black, bottomless pits. Her smile widened into a grotesque, inhuman grin. It would have been so easy. The thing wearing his daughter's face hissed, its voice now a chorus of 1,000 whispering souls. "We offered you peace. Now you will only know pain. The bedroom dissolved back into the grey metal of the workshop. The smell of summer rain was replaced by the stench of rot. Jack was on his knees, gasping for air, his body shaking uncontrollably. He had faced his own personal hell and rejected it. But the victory felt hollow. He was saved, but he was more alone than ever. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that the entity was done trying to seduce him. From now on, it would only try to break him. Dr. Aris Thorne saw the escalating chaos, not as a disaster, but as a failure in methodology. The crew's fear, their emotional contamination, was interfering with his data. He believed the rift was a conscious entity, and the only way to truly understand it was through direct, unfiltered contact. While everyone else was trying to hide from the monster, Thorne decided to walk into its cage. "You're insane, Aris," Jack told him. Finding the scientist in the EVA prep room, checking the seals on a heavily modified spacesuit. The suit was bristling with extra sensors and data recorders. "I'm a scientist, Jack," Thorne retorted, his eyes gleaming with an obsessive fire. "This is the single greatest discovery in human history. To turn our backs on it now, out of fear, is a crime against knowledge itself. I am not going to let this opportunity slip away, because a few weak-minded grunts can't handle a new paradigm." Kamdea Rostova tried to stop him. She stood in the doorway, her face set like stone, flanked by Riggs and another security guard. "I'm ordering you to stand down, Doctor. That is a direct command." Thorne just laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Your command is irrelevant, Eva. Your authority dissolved the moment Maria walked into that rift. You're just a captain on a sinking ship. I'm building a life raft to a new world." He sealed his helmet, the polarized visor hiding his fanatical expression. "I'm going in. Record everything." There was nothing they could do short of shooting him. With a grim nod from Rostova, Riggs and the other guards stood down, their faces a mixture of anger and dread. Thorne, encased in his bulky suit, strode with purpose toward the engine room. He used his command override to open the sealed door. The puppet tech inside, still twitching and shuffling, turned its empty gaze on him but made no move to intercept. It was as if the rift knew Thorne was coming, a willing sacrifice. On the bridge, the remaining crew watched on the main screen. The audio from Thorne's suit crackled to life. "I'm approaching the event horizon," he said, his voice calm, academic. "Energy readings are stable. No immediate signs of physical hostility. The entity in the room is ignoring me. It seems to recognize my intent." He stood before the dark, vertical slit. It pulsed softly, like a silent greeting. "I'm crossing the threshold now for science." Thorne stepped into the rift and disappeared. For 10 agonizing seconds there was only static. Jack held his breath. Then the audio feed roared back to life. It wasn't Thorne's voice. It was a scream. A raw, piercing shriek of such pure, unadulterated terror that it made the blood run cold. It was the sound of a human mind being flayed, layer by layer. Then came the words, tumbling out between ragged, gasping breaths. Thorne was babbling. No, not the equations. They're wrong. They're all wrong. The numbers have faces. Oh God, the numbers are screaming at me. His voice rose in pitch, becoming a hysterical wail. It's not a dimension. It's an answer. The final calculation. The universe is a mistake. It's all a mistake, and this is the remainder. The cosmic error. A new sound emerged, a wet, tearing noise. Thorne's screams became choked, gurgling things. It's inside me. It's rewriting me. I can see it all. The beginning, the end. the endless screaming silence in between. It's beautiful. It's... His voice dissolved into a final, horrific, wet burst of sound. Then silence. The audio feed was dead. The data stream from his suit, however, kept transmitting for another 30 seconds. It wasn't scientific readings. It was a stream of pure information, but not in any language or code known to man. It was a torrent of alien symbols and impossible geometric patterns that flashed on the screen. The few techs who looked directly at it cried out, clutching their heads. One of them began vomiting uncontrollably. "Shut it off!" Rostova yelled, her voice cracking. "Shut it all off!" Maria's replacement scrambled to kill the feed. The screen went blank. The bridge was silent. But the echo of Thorne's final, mad revelations hung in the air. He hadn't found a new world. He had found the fundamental flaw in reality. The equation that proves existence is a meaningless horror. And the knowledge had utterly annihilated him. They now knew what lay on the other side. Not fire and brimstone. Just the awful screaming truth. Thorne's death was the final turning point. The debate was over. There was no more talk of study or communication. The rift was not a discovery to be understood. It was a cancer to be excised. Even Commander Rostova, the woman of regulations, saw the truth. The book was useless. They were on their own, and their only option was survival. She called Jack and Riggs to the now deserted bridge. Her uniform was rumpled, her hair had come loose from its tight bun, and her eyes held a new hard-edged clarity. The fear was still there, but it had been burned down into a core of pure resolve. "The fleet isn't coming in time," she said, her voice low and steady. "Waiting is a death sentence. We've lost Thorne, Maria, and at least 4 others to suicide or madness. The station is falling apart. We have to close that hole, now." "How?" Riggs asked. His big hands clenched into fists. "We can't shoot it. We can't even get near it without our brains turning to soup." Jack had been thinking about it, turning the problem over and over in his mind, the way he would with a broken machine. We can't fight the rift itself. It's not from our reality. But the thing that's holding it open is the Holloway Drive. Rostova looked at him, her expression grim. The drive created the tear. Can it uncreate it? "No," Jack said, shaking his head. "It's like the drive knocked a hole in a wall. The hole is there now, independent of the hammer. But if we could detonate the drive, cause a massive conventional energy release right at the source, it might be enough to destabilize the hole, to force it to collapse on itself." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. It would mean a controlled overload of the station's primary fusion core, channeled directly into the Holloway device. Riggs paled. "You want to blow up the engine room? The whole station could go with it." "It's a risk," Jack admitted. "I can probably focus the blast, make it directional, but the engine room will be vaporized, and anyone in it." The implication was clear. It was a suicide mission. Someone would have to get to the Holloway Drive, past the twitching puppet tech, and manually initiate the overload sequence. The automated systems were too corrupted to be trusted. "I'll do it," Jack said before anyone else could speak. It wasn't a heroic declaration. It was a statement of fact. He was the chief engineer. He was the only one who understood the core's systems well enough to pull it off. And a dark part of his mind whispered, he had the least to lose. His world had ended 7 years ago. "No," Rostova said firmly. "We've lost enough people. This isn't on one person. We do this together." The plan was desperate and simple. Riggs would lead a security team to create a diversion, drawing the attention of the puppet tech. While it was distracted, Jack and Rostova would slip into the engine room from a secondary access crawl space. They would make their way to the primary control console, initiate the overload, and then, if there was time, try to make it to the station's emergency escape pods on the far side of the habitat ring. They gathered what was left of the crew in the mess hall. Maybe 30 people out of the original 200. Their faces were hollowed out by fear and exhaustion. Rostova laid out the plan. She didn't sugarcoat it. She told them the odds. She told them it might not work. But for the first time in days, a flicker of something other than fear appeared in their eyes. It was a spark of purpose, a chance to fight back. As they prepared, strapping on what little armor they had and checking their weapons, Jack felt a strange calm settle over him. The whispers from the rift were still there, a constant hiss of promised oblivion in the back of his mind. The phantom image of Lily still flickered at the edge of his vision. But they no longer had the same power over him. He had found a new focus. He wasn't just an engineer trying to fix a broken machine. He was a man with a hammer, about to bring the whole damned wall crashing down. The crawl space was tight, dark, and smelled of burnt wiring and decay. Jack led the way, a plasma cutter in his hand, with Rostova right behind him. The noise from the main engine room corridor was a cacophony. Shouted orders, the high-pitched whine of plasma rifles, and a terrible, multi-voiced screaming from the puppet tech as Riggs and his team began their diversion. "Now," Jack whispered, and sliced through the final bolts of a maintenance hatch. It fell open with a low clang, revealing the engine room. The sight was even worse up close. The air was thick with a visible haze, and the bruise-colored rift dominated the far wall, pulsing with a malevolent energy that made the hairs on Jack's arms stand up. The puppet tech was at the main door, its limbs flailing unnaturally as it swiped at the security team, its head turning a full 360 degrees. Riggs was holding its attention, buying them precious seconds. They dropped to the floor and began to move, using the massive conduits of the Holloway Drive as cover. The room was no longer just a room. The floor seemed to slope at an odd angle, and the walls were coated in a thin, greasy film of the same black sludge that had come from the nutrient dispensers. The rift's influence was absolute here. This was its territory. As they neared the control console, a shape detached itself from the shadows behind a power regulator. It was one of Riggs's men, the one who had screamed about the voices and run. His eyes were wide and empty, and he held his plasma rifle leveled at them. "You can't," he whispered, his voice sounding thin and stretched. "He said you can't close the door. It's so beautiful in here. It's so quiet." "Stand down, sailor," Rostova said, her voice hard, raising her own sidearm. The man shook his head slowly. No more orders, no more pain. He raised his rifle. Before he could fire, a single shot rang out. Not from Rostova, it was Riggs. He had broken from the fight at the door and circled around, his face a mask of grim duty. The possessed crewman collapsed, his empty eyes staring at the ceiling. "Go!" Riggs yelled, turning back to the main fight. "I'll hold them off." Jack and Rostova scrambled the last few feet to the console. The screen was a nightmare of the same alien symbols Thorne's suit had broadcast. Jack ignored them, physically ripping the panel off to get at the manual overrides beneath. His fingers flew across the circuitry, hot wiring connections, bypassing corrupted safeties. "The core is responding," he grunted, sweat pouring down his face. I'm diverting power. Overload sequence will initiate in 2 minutes. Suddenly, the noise from the rift changed. The low hum intensified into a piercing shriek. The air grew impossibly cold. The entity knew what they were doing. It was fighting back. A figure stepped out of the rift. It wasn't the puppet tech. It wasn't Thorn. It was Lily. She stood between them and the escape route, looking exactly as she had in Jack's vision, down to the missing scar. But this time, she wasn't smiling. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "You promised you would always protect me, Daddy," she said, her voice no longer a child's, but a deep, resonant chorus of 1,000 angry souls. "You're trying to hurt us. You're trying to lock me in the dark again." Rostova aimed her weapon, her hand trembling. "Jack, don't look at it." But he couldn't look away. The thing wearing his daughter's face took a step forward. The floor around her began to blacken and crumble, as if reality itself couldn't bear her presence. "It's almost done," Jack said. His eyes locked on the apparition. 60 seconds. "You will not leave me," the Lily thing snarled. It raised a small hand, and a wave of pure psychic force slammed into Rostova, throwing her back against a bulkhead. She crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Now it was just Jack and the monster from his heart. It glided toward him, its face contorting, shifting between Lily's features and a horrifying visage of swirling static and black energy. "Stay with me, Daddy," it whispered, reaching out a hand. "Stay with me forever." Jack looked at the chrono on the console. 10 seconds. He looked at the creature. He knew he couldn't outrun it. He wouldn't make it to the escape pods. He looked at Rostova's still form. Maybe she could. He didn't run. He took a step toward the monster. "I'm sorry, Lily," he whispered to the memory of his real daughter. Then he looked the entity in its shifting, hateful eyes. "I'm not your daddy." He grabbed a loose, sparking power conduit from the console and lunged forward, not to attack the creature, but to embrace it. He wrapped his arms around the thing, driving the live conduit into its form. The entity shrieked, a sound that cracked the very air. Its form dissolved into a cyclone of black light and screaming faces, engulfing Jack completely. He felt a pain beyond all description, a sensation of his mind, his soul, his very existence being unwritten. The timer on the console hit 0. There was a moment of absolute silence, a single perfect second where every sound on the station, the screaming, the alarms, the whispers, ceased. It was the universe holding its breath. Then, a silent flash of pure white light erupted from the Holloway drive. The light consumed the rift, the puppet tech, the Lily thing, and Jack Russo. It expanded, vaporizing the engine room, scarring the corridors, and then just as suddenly as it appeared, it contracted, collapsing in on itself until it was a single tiny pinprick that winked out of existence. And then there was only silence. A deep, profound, and heavy quiet that was more shocking than all the noise that had come before it. The sealed door to the engine room was gone. In its place was just nothing. A gaping hole that looked out onto the starfield. The entire section of the station had been surgically removed. She staggered to her feet, her body screaming in protest. The emergency lights were flickering, but they were a steady, normal orange, not the sick red of the alert. The air was thin, full of dust and the smell of superheated metal, but the stench of rot and burnt sugar was gone. The whispers were gone. She put her hand to her head, listening to the silence inside her own mind for the first time in what felt like an eternity. They were alone again. Riggs found her a few minutes later. He was battered and bruised, but alive. "It's over," he said, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "It's just gone." They did a head count. Of the 30 or so who had mounted the final defense, 17 had survived. They were wounded, traumatized, but alive. The station was a wreck, operating on emergency power, its main drive gone, adrift in the middle of nowhere. But it was stable. It was clean. There was no sign of Jack, not a body, not a shred of his uniform. He had been at the epicenter of the blast, the fulcrum of their salvation. He had been erased. He had embraced his personal hell to save them all from a universal one. In the weeks that followed, the survivors worked to restore basic functions, to turn their floating tomb back into a livable lifeboat. They rationed supplies. They tended to the wounded. They tried to piece their minds back together. They didn't talk much about what had happened. There were no words for it. The horror was a shared scar, a silent understanding between them all. Rostova found herself in the observation deck one day, the same place Jack had been when it all started. She looked out at the peaceful, silent stars. The shortcut to hell was closed. They had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like waking from a terminal illness, weak and hollowed out, forever aware of the shadow you had escaped. As she stared into the black, she thought she saw a flicker of movement in her peripheral vision. A flash of red, like a child's jacket, disappearing behind a support strut. Her heart seized in her chest. She whipped her head around, her eyes wide, every nerve ending screaming. But there was nothing there, just the empty, silent corridor. The station was quiet, the whispers were gone. The silence was perfect. And Rostova knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she would spend the rest of her life listening to it. Always waiting for the moment it might break.